Welcome back to Houston Newsmakers. We're talking with Dr. Joyce Beebe, Fellow in Public Finance at Baker Institute for Public Policy at Rice University. Dr. Beebe, I had a recent conversation with a local congressman who said, you know, I'm not in favor of any increase in the minimum wage because minimum wage is just that. It's for entry-level people into business. So to that you say there are those who say, no, we have to raise it a little bit. Talk about some of the talk about having an index associated with the minimum wage going up.
So many states have taken that approach. Like we mentioned a little bit earlier, about 29 states plus DC has increased their minimum wage at a state level because federal government has never increased the minimum wage for about a decade. So every state decided, well, we're gonna decide for our state's resident benefit because the minimum wage is just way too low. So how does those 29 states approach the issue is over the years, there's various approaches, as Julia, they're all over the place. Some states just decided they are going to index the cost of living. So every year they inch up a little bit based on the higher cost of living automatically. Other states has a target. Let's say the state just decided, I'm going to raise the minimum wage to $12, $13, $15 by the end of the adjustment or transition period. Mm-hmm. So slowly they will reach that goal, but every state is also different in terms of how long will it take into reaching the final destination of their choosing.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this: if you have a higher hourly wage, does that mean better outcomes as far as health care is concerned? You touched upon Medicaid, Medicare just a second ago. What does higher wages mean for those who are trying to get health care or in that loop where they are maybe going to the emergency room instead of having a regular doctor? Does the minimum wage factor into helping them out in any way, shape, or form?
So I like to zero in on the minimum wage workers in the industry you talked about. So for example, under the current practices, for example, a fair portion of the minimum wage workers work in the healthcare industry as home healthcare aide or healthcare aide assistants. So they go to either nursing homes or people's homes to care for patients or senior citizens, for example. A fair percentage of them earn minimum wage and they're paid out of Medicare and Medicaid, the federal program. So for example, if the minimum wage really becomes $15 per hour, their pay will increase substantially as a result. So for them, it's good news because their pay increases. But for the government, in terms of the public program, Medicare, Medicaid, it will obviously increase the expenditure as well.
So for those of us who are not in the sphere of minimum wage, why should we care? I mean, there are people who have, you know, they've got good jobs, they're working along, and they wonder, okay, well, okay, you got minimum wage, and why should we care? How are we impacted directly or indirectly?
So the first and foremost reason you should care is it goes without saying we're all part of this community, and we really should care about our fellow workers and their well-beings. And the second reason we should care is, as we mentioned, we are all consumers. No matter how we are affected or to a certain extent, no matter we are business owners or not, we're all consumers in the society. And finally, we should care because we are all taxpayers. So the tax revenue obviously finances the government program. So although you don't really directly see it, your money goes to the government in terms of tax revenue, and all those programs that's sort of financed or administrated by the government will be influenced from a financial perspective as a result of the well-being of these minimum wage workers.
So when you're watching some of the politicians talking about the impacts of this and they're spinning it one way or the other, does your head want to pop off when people are making comments that you say, wait a minute, that is just not true? How do you moderate? How do you try to make sure that people know what the real deal is?
I try to see the reason why they're saying this, and one line of reasoning that come out quite recently, or people have been saying, is that Well, they're not really against the minimum wage movement as a whole. They actually support the increase of minimum wage, but they believe the labor market is regional. So if you decide to impose a $15 minimum wage as a one-size-fits-all program nationwide, it might work well for high cost of living areas or cities, big cities, but it may not work so well for rural areas or maybe smaller cities. So what these people are advocating right now is, well, maybe we should think about labor market as a regional or not as a national basis. So they can think about this in two ways. One is that maybe we can do a lower minimum wage for the federal level, lower than 15, and states can supplement as their own rules. For example, DC have a higher minimum wage of $15 per hour. If the federal minimum wage eventually becomes 12, then DC can do 15 on their own. And the second thing is some people propose to have a two-tier or several-tier system. Mm-hmm. So you divide the whole country into several regions and say, well, if you belong to this region that is having lower labor costs, maybe you do minimum wage of X dollars. And if you belong to a higher minimum wage area, that you can do a higher minimum wage. So instead of a one-size-fits-all $15, we may break the country into several regions and go that way.
Well, good. Well, that's another way to look at it. Hopefully some folks are taking that into account. Dr. Joyce Beebe, thank you for our minimum wage economics class here. I told you earlier I was never good at economics, but I'm glad you were here to help us through this. Hopefully we've got a little bit better idea about what's being debated in Congress. Thank you for being here this morning. We appreciate you.
Thank you.